Okay, everybody, I'm gonna have to level with you for this video. I don't like discussing anything involving anything that could be related to modern politics. I find it unfun, and it's not what I want my channel to really be about. I would much rather do things I like talking about, like reviewing games, or making funny videos, or even doing my own projects one day. But I feel like I have to do this. I feel that something that I like is being threatened over really ridiculous reasons. But I'm gonna give a fair voice to this, and I feel I have to, and I'm gonna catch flack for this one day. I know one day someone's gonna dig this up at me and be like, "Look at you, you racist," but I have to do this. I just kind of have to a bit. I have to. I have to say this, and I'm gonna give it. Good. Just let me level with you. I don't have a script or this really well planned. I just need to do this here. I'm gonna ask the honest question here. Is fantasy races like orcs, dark elves, and tieflings racist? Or is it, like, whatever people want to call it? Well, let's give it an honest look, and let's see where this road takes us. Now, to level with you, I'm going off of the generic D&D idea. I may reference other fictional universes, but when I do that, I'll try to be specific. I want to say, in this fantasy novel, they did like this. I'm going to try to give names, because I want to be accurate here. But to call something racist in this sense, like an orc is racist, you have to break it down into different parts, figure out what you mean by it. First thing, let's go over the idea of cultural stereotypes. Oh, you have like this wizard and it kind of looks Chinese. Let's just immediately knock the kind of thing out of the park, because unless it's very obviously mean and targeted, it really doesn't count most of the time. Because it's not treated equally fairly. We remix cultures from the real world all the time. How many stories remix Rome, or have the fall of Rome, or a corrupt Rome, or England, or France, or Germany, or some discount mixing where we mix them up? That happens all the time in fantasy, even when it's subtle. Like in War Machines, you have Kaldor, I think his name is, I can never say it right. They are obviously based on Russia. How many countries are based on the idea of, we're the freedom-loving people, who are probably related to the English people, who are totally based on America? Or in Warhammer Fantasy, you have the Empire, which is like the Holy Roman Empire, and Bretonia, which is like France. You have like all these different things that are clearly based on real-world cultures to at least a degree, or at least they take inspiration from them. Let's immediately go here and just knock those and don't count them, because it's never treated fairly with that. So if we accept that we can remix cultures like Germany, France, Rome, and England, and America, then we can remix anything else. Mainly, and I know people say, well, you don't belong to that culture. You don't know the people who write this stuff. You don't know that. So don't go claiming things you don't know. And second thing, no one can know everything, but yet you can learn. And quite frankly, I'll take the advice of someone who spent years researching a culture, even if they aren't related to the racial group it normally is associated with, or with some person who's vaguely related to it and doesn't know the most basic things about it. But I'm gonna knock that out because it's not what anyone's talking about. It doesn't really count, and I'm gonna count that as not racist. Of course, it could obviously be taken to an extreme, but in general practice, it's not. So we can knock that out. Now, the second part is going to be interesting. This one's going to be difficult. It's the idea that having a race or species where they always want to do one thing is racist. First thing, they often use stuff like the orcs being all brutish, killing savages. First thing, we have to establish something. Is it racist or speciesist? Because those are two very different things. Because racist is something very specific, and so is speciesist. These are two very different things, and they mean different things. To be racist means you dislike or have an unreasonable hatred to a group that belongs to your own species. To be speciesist would to be mean or racist unnecessarily or think you are better than a species other than your own. Now, this can get tricky in certain sentences of the word, but that's generally it. And there's a massive difference. Races, or sub-races, or whatever you want to call them in a species, are much similar and much more similar than any other species. For instance, in any fantasy setting you could probably ever dig up, every single human race that's ever existed on this planet is more similar than many elves in fiction. That is just a straight-up rule, at least genetically. We're talking more genetically and physiologically here. So, we can immediately establish that. Races and species are two different things. Now, the question is, do fantasy races, air quotes, count as a different species? That sounds weird, but I'm going to try to be honest here. Do they count? One of the technicalities of being classified with keeps two species from being together is that they have to not, one of the qualifications that they can't interbreed. If the two things mated, they will not produce viable offspring. The baby will not come to term and will not work, and just will not survive if it can even get that far. Now, there are exceptions to this rule we should classify. For instance, many canine species are separated when most canine, at least currently alive canine breeds, are perfectly capable of interspecies mating. You can mix wolves and dogs, and foxes and wolves. Even though they are technically classified as different species, they still are compatible. And then you have stuff like lions and tigers. So the ruling on does this have to necessarily be impossible is kind of vague, but it does give us an interesting window of how we view it. For instance, we don't call a lion or a tiger that mate just a tiger or a lion. We call it a liger. We give it a unique name, which I think could be used as a way if you wanted to describe stuff like half-elves and half-orcs. But we have to ask the question now, do this different species in most fantasy settings, like humans, elves, dwarves, and orcs, and stuff like that, do they count as different species? Well, this would probably go on a case-by-case basis. You have to look at almost every fantasy setting. But in generic D&D, yeah, probably. They count as different species because they share no connection. They aren't really related in any traditional fashion. At least not at first. The humans aren't necessarily related. Humans didn't come from the same place as dwarves. Dwarves didn't come from the same place as elves. Orcs didn't come from the same place. They all came from different places, and granted, most of them are magical in nature to some degree, but they are different. They aren't related. It's not like saying, oh, well, humans and Neanderthals, because they came from another human species. It doesn't work like that. They are different. They have different origins. The one thing they could throw a monkey wrench, though, into that is they have stuff like half-elves and half-orcs and presumably other half-things. So, does that count them as making them different species? I would say yes. Fantasy likes to use the term races because that's what Tolkien said they were. Even though even in Lord of the Rings, it's very easy to tell these are different species. In fact, Tolkien's races might be more different to each other, especially with elves and humans, than most fancy things after them. So that's why we use the term race in like stuff like D&D. It's not because they actually are most of the time. It's because that's what we call them. It's just a term. It's a naming convention, more or less than anything. So, you have that. So, I would not consider them the same species. I would consider most of them capable of interbreeding, but not the same species. So, this immediately changes the conversation from is an orc racist to is an orc being like a speciesist, which already massively changed the game. Saying something like racism, as we know it, does exist in the real world. It has existed and does exist. It's not new. It's not a new concept. It does exist in reality, and we're all aware of it. However, speciesism, as a concept, is more of a fictional idea than anything. Yes, we did technically have more than one human species running around at the time, for a while at least. At multiple different points, there could have been easily multiple groups surviving at the same time. And many of them could have had some fights, but we see no real evidence of them not getting along, or at the very least not having interracial wars, because they thought of themselves as different species. Well, obviously, evidence for this is hard to tell, but it doesn't lean that way. Mainly due to many different humans groups having connections to other human species, like how all Europeans are related to Neanderthals. This implies that even if they had species-based wars, which is unlikely to have happened, they probably didn't care about that too much because they were willing to mate with each other at some point. Or at the very least, they didn't view their hatred as strong enough to prevent one guy from looking over at a Neanderthal woman and thinking she's hot. So clearly, any kind of conflict, though, were not strong enough to keep that from happening. Of course, never underestimate the power of that. But so we're changing so now we have to view is stuff like orcs and elves and the ideas about them now it's not the concept if it's racist, but is it speciesist? Now, this is a tricky concept, as once again, the rules for speciesism isn't terribly well defined. Because, once again, it's more or less a fictional concept rather than a real one, or more accurately, it's a fictional concept that has very limited real-world examples. Because there are differences between species. Now, technically, yes, races do have differences. For instance, white people are worse at dealing with direct sunlight than black people on average, but those are relatively minor differences, so they don't really count. Species, on the other hand, have different rules to them. Mainly, and I'll put this to one example, instincts. Now, as humans are probably one of the species with the weakest form of natural instincts ever. We have almost no natural inbred skills or abilities. We learn all of that. Which, granted, we take years to develop properly into adults, so we can get away with those kind of shenanigans. But we have almost no natural instincts. I said almost. Now, people can argue about it, but I would define natural instinct as something that a person, as long as they don't suffer from some kind of brain defect, or something of this nature, it has inbuilt into them, by nature, will follow, or at least will all have the urge to follow. I'll describe that later. So, for instance, all of us agree eating feels good. People like to eat most of the time, or at least like the taste of food. We are born with liking good food. We are also all born, more or less, unless there's a brain function deficiency, not liking pain. We don't like starving, and we don't like pain. So we avoid those things whenever possible. We also like other things. We like having our throats nice and hydrated, so we drink to satisfy that desire. If you notice a lot, now, you could probably classify trying to figure out what the line between is cultural and what is ingrained isn't actually too hard, because every society will find some way to deal with these needs. Every last one. You'll never find a society that has ever existed that lasted more than 5 minutes that doesn't have a way to feed the people's needs for food. It doesn't exist because it wouldn't exist. It doesn't work. If people can't eat, they die. And people don't build things that generally will kill them. Well, they might build things to kill the enemies, but not them. It just doesn't work. Now, granted, in humans, the way to fulfill those needs or desires is not very well laid out. After all, just because we like being full and not being hungry doesn't mean we have a very good explanation of how to actually fix that problem. That's probably because humans have weaker instincts than a lot of creatures. Now you could break it down, but I could say, in general, you could break down human things to being stuff like we like the taste of food, or we like eating in general, we like water, we like sleeping, we like feeling well rested. There's definitely a desire to mate between humans, so, the species continues, and stuff like that. We don't like stuff like pain, suffering, being hungry. Anything like that is generally unpleasant. And those are pretty obvious things. Almost every human, unless they suffer from some kind of brain damage, or I don't want to say brain damage, but an issue or something, just some condition, will follow and try to fulfill. It's very basic. However, there's nothing stopping you from fulfilling those functions. You can easily choose with some willpower to not eat. You can like many cultures throughout the world, or at least some of them, such as medieval knights or Templars, would take a vow of chastity, which would theoretically at least minus one of those things, one of those desires, but yet can be done. Some people go on hunger strikes when which would require denying their food. Some people will willingly hurt themselves for some reason, even though pain is bad to them. These people necessarily don't have those instincts. It's because they have willpower or a desire that overrides them. Now, here's the question. Now, I just went on a few minute tangent about this, so how does this relate back to what I was talking about? Easy. Because something like an orc or an elf or something else may have different natural instincts than a human, or may go about these a different way. For instance, an orc, for example, as a fictional idea I just made up on the spot, an orc may have the instinct to want to kill or fight. This may be an instinct that they view internally as good. They may view feeling weak or other things like that as bad. It would be a natural instinct, like how feeling hungry is bad, or how feeling full is good. It's simple. It's just how they work. There's nothing forcing them to do it. They're not told that they have to do it, and they must do it, and they will always do it, but it's something they want to do. Now, this could apply to a lot of personality traits about certain groups. This could easily apply to anything, but an orc is a perfect example. maybe the reason they always want to fight, or they just want to kill and do things, is because their biology makes them think it feels good, make it good to them. It's like good to them. It's a thing they like doing. It's good. It's like eating or anything else to a human, or like humans' natural instincts. It's something that's good to them, so they want to fulfill it. It makes sense. This is why an orc culture would be around fulfilling that desire, which in this hypothetical case, one of them would be fighting and killing. So their societies would be built around, to at least a degree, fulfilling the desire to fight and kill. Like how human societies are often built on the idea that everyone eats because not eating is not fun. Sorry, I lose my breath because I talk a lot. So that's the thing. That is a definite thing. If a species is born with a different natural instincts to do certain things, like I'm suggesting, then it wouldn't be speciesist to have that, because that would be a logical observation. It wouldn't, just as it wouldn't be racist to say that white people on average have lighter skin than black people on average, because that's a scientific fact. It's not like racist. It's just pointing out a scientific obviously. Stuff like racism and speciesism would be founded on things that don't actually exist or don't matter. But calling an orc savage may be appropriate if they have instincts to make them inclined to be savage. But here's the interesting part that people forget. Just like a person can choose not to eat with at least enough willpower, an orc could, in this case theoretically, break the will and choose not to kill and attack. That could work. And that's an interesting story you could do. You could very easily tell that story of an orc trying to fight that and trying to keep it back, but yet it's just like trying not to eat for them. It's something that's painful and hard to do. It's painful and hard. And that could be interesting. You could tell that story, but only if you really allow that to be a thing. Okay. Now, that's something else you have to, of course, always acknowledge and play with. It's a question, it's complex, but it makes sense if you think about it. It even helps explain things like half-orcs. Why are like in D&D, why are half-orcs on average more aggressive than normal humans? Because they still have a bit of those instincts to attack and kill. Maybe not as much, but they could have at least a little bit, and though it might not be as strong as humans' normal instincts, would still apply. So, these kind of things make sense if you view it from that range. And I should probably feel to mention this, the culture they live in. Now, it's entirely possible that in this hypothetical idea or setting, the orc desire to kill and murder may not be as strong as it's pronounced in the orc cultures we see in fiction, but has grown so over time. Has grown to be more of this as a sort of almost hedonism, a sort of desire to fulfill this. This is another idea you could work with. So, for instance, maybe a society, or original orc society back in their Stone or Neolithic age, was like, we want to fight. Fight is good. So they came with this idea where they have the fight pits or whatever, where young orcs would fight each other to fulfill this desire. But then, like when people were old and weak, when orcs were old and weak, they may choose to voluntarily, as some way, may come about the idea that they would fight another orc so they could get some kind of, some last thing before they die, a sort of last meal of sorts. That, at least I die with fulfilling so they die happy, essentially. At least in their eyes. Which then could easily lead to them thinking killing good, or at least different like that. And this can spiral out where they do it to fulfill a desire. They could easily express them out in going out and hurting people. In going out to the human village and attacking them. Then it becomes their thing. It becomes their culture. It becomes like, we are the orc tribe and we attack the weak softlings. So, you see how this works? It's a complex issue, but to go back around to all the questions I've been asking this whole time, to finish my question, are stuff like orcs and drow in D&D racist? No, they aren't. They're our best species, and even then, that holds very little water. Oh, and just to be clear, just because they share at best some superficial elements to a real-world race, unless very purposely designed to mimic that race, and generally has to be very intentional, not an accident, it does not count. Just because orcs have darker skin does not necessarily mean they are meant to represent a darker skinned people. Oh, and please, people, this doesn't make sense. Stop saying that the drow are evil because they're dark-skinned. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. And they're not even dark-skinned like black people or anything. Their skin's more purple. So, purple lives matter, I guess. Yeah, sorry. That was a hard video for me to this has been hard for me to make. But probably gonna shoot on my channel. But I have to do it, so, that's just how the cookie crumbles, I guess. But, yeah, hopefully you found this video informing and entertaining, and hopefully it helps in this time. And remember, people, don't be afraid to don't let society tell you this is bad just because that's the fad now. Always do what you believe to be right. Because don't do what you believe to be right. Do what is right. If you do that, you will always if you do what is truly right in the world. Even if it doesn't help you, it's always the right thing to do, regardless of the situation, to be the best person you can be. Remember that, and also, just remember, at the end of the day, it's a work of fiction. It's not meant to represent reality, so don't feel you have to bring in real-world stuff to a fictional issue. It's not, you don't have to do that. Fiction is escapism. Don't be afraid to escape into a different world where rules don't necessarily apply like they do here. So, that's my message. Hope you enjoyed this video. Bye.